Good evening, everybody. Hi, Miss Joan. I'm just want to welcome Dr. Sue Ziegler from Memorial University is going to be joining us this evening to talk about climate change.
Now, you seeing the title slide okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, excellent. So this is great to have an opportunity to sort of have a bit of a chat and overview to talk about how our natural environment actually has been reducing the impact of our emissions. And what I mean by emissions, I'm talking about release of greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, into our atmosphere, which is having an influence, obviously, on our climate. And kind of put this into the context of ongoing climate change and also the initiatives that are underway by our government here in Canada, as well as other governments across the globe to sort of meet targets for reducing these emissions. So this 50% discount that I have here in the title slide, I'm hoping becomes sort of, is understood kind of at the end or throughout the talk. And what I'm referring to is that we've got these natural ecosystems in our environment that have really cut the amount of carbon dioxide that we've been putting into the atmosphere in half. And so some of the work that we do in my group is actually involved in understanding how some of these natural systems are responding to climate change in kind and what might happen to that discount that we're enjoying. Before I get started, I do want to just acknowledge the fact that I've had the honor to work within ecosystems and also working here on campus and so forth, which is really on the traditional territories of a lot of indigenous groups within the region, including the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Inuit, and Innu. And Julia put out a sort of a little blurb about this particular panel session, I guess, and had, mentioned about net zero emissions. And so Canada, like many other countries, has sort of joined on to this international agreement to get to what's called net zero emissions by 2050, not very far off into the future. And what that net zero refers to is we're talking about basically getting to a point where we're either not releasing any carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, or if we are emitting some, we are applying some kind of mechanisms. We're using some kind of management of ecosystems or some kind of technology to recapture the same amount of what we're emitting. So that basically on a net sense, kind of like a bank account, we're actually not increasing the reservoir or the bank account of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that we can allow natural systems to bring that down further. So the recent changes, like in that first graph of the carbon dioxide I showed you from the Keeling plot, they call it, which is from Charles Keeling from Mauna Loa, is shown here, which is a nice average value for the globe in carbon dioxide, is nicely matched. So 1960 to the late 2000s, you see that trend, and it's matched up with these observations of mean annual temperature. So this anomaly means that these are increases above zero. We're looking at increases of temperature relative to this period of time of the 1960s to 1990s. So when we depart from 1990, we start seeing this increase. And then these are all the various projections for where we might head with temperature, given the best ability and knowledge that we have about the Earth system in response to changes in this atmospheric composition of CO2, atmospheric concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere. So each of the last 3 decades have been successfully warmer at the surface than any preceding decade since records have been good enough to know this, which is about the mid-1800s. And so we have a nice kind of direct record, in addition to these really nice geological records, linking this atmospheric carbon dioxide or atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration to global mean temperatures on Earth. So the interesting thing about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and our emissions, so here is a sort of a figure of major releases and uptake of carbon dioxide happening on the globe. And of course, our activities, our use of fuels for energy, heating, and so forth, are generating almost 9 gigatons of this carbon dioxide, carbon in the atmosphere. On average, it's a decent rate even for today. And so that rate's going up and down depending on activity, but it hovers around that value. And that we don't see that much actually ending up in the atmosphere. We have really good numbers on what we're putting out there, and we have really good numbers on what's actually in the atmosphere. And we know that the atmosphere is only growing every year by about 4. So about half of what we release is actually observed to be increasing, contributing to an increase in the atmospheric composition globally. And that is because we have these wonderful natural sinks in our environment that are taking up a tremendous amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere actively every year. And so we have this really nice discount that we're getting. It's like a 50%, if not more, discount. And, what I wanted to do is to talk about what these suspects are, or maybe solutions is a better word. So what are the solutions? Where does this come from in our environment? And so it really comes from stores, right? We have these natural, diverse stores of carbon that has been derived from carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. So for example, in the marine environment, we have sediments, so all this like beautiful organic matter in the sediments, or we have vast amounts of biomass in seagrasses or algae, as well as calcium carbonate and biomass stored in coral reefs. On land, soils, wetlands have a tremendous amount of soil carbon, as well as vast amounts of biomass. So there's lots of these solutions, these stores, if you will, that we have throughout the world that have actually been very responsive, unbelievably responsive to our release of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And this can be depicted by looking at on the top side of this graph, where everything above 0 is indicating the contributions every year. So this is a cumulative amount of carbon dioxide. Not cumulative, sorry, this is the rate of carbon dioxide that's actually increasing, attributed to fossil fuel release. And then in the brown here is land use change. So for example, if we clear areas of the forest and burn that for agricultural use, that ends up being released and increasing the release of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So it's been increasing as we've been more and more active as communities on Earth. We've been pumping more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So the rates or the flux, if you will, that is the amount per year from the entire globe has been increasing steadily. No surprise there. What's interesting though is that the rate of uptake, so the sink, if you will, for that carbon in the atmosphere has also been increasing. So the oceans have, from what we understand, and we have better predictions when we get into the 1960s, have actually been increasing their uptake of carbon dioxide over all that time, and so have land systems as well. And there's a lot more variability in the land sink. And so thus, when we look at what actually ends up in the atmosphere in this light blue here, we only find about 50% of what is actually being released is actually ending up in the atmosphere on an annual basis. And so that really formulates this sort of discount that I was referring to. So it's really great that we actually, at the same time that we've been releasing more and more, the systems on our planet have actually been taking more and more up. Now, our challenge, when it comes to this, is trying to figure out what these systems are going to do as the Earth continues, as our climate continues to warm. And so we use a lot of projections. There are different types of models that are informed by our understanding of these systems on how much carbon will be taken up on an annual basis by the ocean, and how much carbon would be carbon dioxide would be taken up by the land systems. And you can see there's a bit of variation here in the projections. And so there's some measurements in here, but these are all projections. So there's a whole bunch of them here. What's interesting is the ocean is shown to continue to be taking up carbon dioxide, but most projections indicate that it's going to level off. And this is because of the pH change in the ocean as a consequence of it taking up more carbon dioxide. And so we may not be getting that any more growth in our discount. So it would be good if we stopped releasing as much and get us back down to net zero. But in the annual, when we look at the land flux, it's the uncertainty is massive, and there are many reasons for that. And some of the research that we do in my group is trying to uncover a little bit of this. So in some of the models are showing that there's an increase in that sink, and it's also going to level off. And then we have others that actually show that the land is going to become this major source. And these have all to do with our uncertainty around some of the mechanisms and reactions within the terrestrial ecosystems. So lots of uncertainty there, but we do know that we've been getting this discount, and it continues to grow. We're just not sure further on out with climate change what the change might be in that discount. So what do these solutions, these climate solutions, or these suspects, these ecosystems have in common that allow them to take up this carbon dioxide that we are releasing? It really comes down to the fact that you've got primary producers who are involved in taking up that carbon dioxide, combining it with water, and making biomass. And it really has to do with what happens with this biomass and dead organic matter that comes from the organisms themselves, in order to understand to what extent it remains a sink of carbon and continues to take it up. Because it can also be, this reaction can go back this way through the process of respiration. So when we eat, for example, and we utilize biomass, of course, we're respiring and carbon dioxide is going back. And microorganisms do the same thing with plant material, for example. So the net result, really, when we're going in this direction from left to right, is a net result of a sink or uptake of and formation of organic material in the environment. And we all love organic matter in my group because that's what we're really interested in, understanding how stable it is and how it's responding to changes in climate because of the role of these important sinks. And the direction and the amount of that sink, how much the land is taking up or how much the ocean is taken up, is really the difference between two massive fluxes when we look at it on a global scale. So really, it's all about a very tiny difference between the amount of carbon dioxide taken up by photosynthesis and the large amount of carbon dioxide that's released by these ecosystems through the process of respiration. And so that very small difference is what really is leading to this net sink of these ecosystems. And it's not only that release of carbon dioxide comes from respiration, but also forest fires is another good example. So right now, the Canadian forest, the entire area of, say, boreal forest of Canada, used to be a net sink on a global scale for carbon dioxide. And right now, in the last couple of years, since about 2018, it has converted to a source because of the intensity and the area of fire. And we don't know how long that will last, but that has converted that particular sink, unfortunately. So the biggest fluxes we have for carbon dioxide between land or Earth's surfaces and ocean and the atmosphere come from photosynthesis and respiration happening in the ocean and happening on land. So when we think about all that carbon on land, for example, most of it is trapped in soils. Soil carbon is a reservoir of carbon that's something on the order of about 3 or more times the amount of carbon dioxide that we have in the entire atmosphere. It's very large. Most of it is actually, a lot of it is concentrated, like the dark colors you see as the highest concentrations of soil organic carbon. You find it in northern parts, the cold places. And that sometimes seems counterintuitive, but the reason for that is it's not lost as easily. Warmer temperatures, you got more respiration, more breakdown of organic matter. Colder temperatures, it gets stored more easily and is held there and over longer periods of time. So we do wonder oftentimes if we warm up environments like these northern areas, if they'll become like warm places and have less carbon, and we lose that storage. And that's a big question out there right now, to see what might win out in a warmer world. And the projections aren't great, because when we look at different scenarios, like a somewhat of a decrease in our emissions versus like business as usual, we can see that those higher latitudes where a lot of that carbon in soils is stored is actually in places that are projected to be some of the warm areas that experience some of the greatest warming. Yeah, and that warming is going to continue, and it's going to exhibit interannual and decadal variability, and it's not going to be uniform. But the general picture that we get from almost all projections really is that it is going to be more intense in higher latitudes. And these areas are where we have all those stores, like lots of rich stores of carbon, whether it's in the Arctic, like these areas, or in Newfoundland. And I get this all the time. People are like, there's soils? I thought it was just rock when you're in Newfoundland. But yes, we have these really beautiful soil profiles in the forest ecosystems across our province. And so really these stores are under scrutiny. We're trying to figure out, well, how are they going to respond as these ecosystems shift in response to changing climate? So warming of a forest and it's all the environments there, obviously is going to lead to microorganisms that live in these environments and utilize the organic matter in these environments to speed up their activity, and they're going to respire more. They're going to release that carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere, and that can be a significant input to the atmosphere for sure. But at the same time, those microbes are also cycling and making available more nutrients because they help to break stuff down. So they're going to make it more rapid, nitrogen and phosphorus, for example, more rapidly available for the plants in that ecosystem. And so that could increase plant productivity, which could increase their uptake of carbon dioxide. So warming can increase uptake and it can increase loss of carbon dioxide, depending upon the balance amongst these different kinds of reactions that are going on in the ecosystem. And so I kind of wanted to just touch on these different things because I think when we think about climate change and we're trying to understand where we're headed with respect to the changes in the atmosphere with those emissions from all of our activity, powering our lights and so forth, we have to understand, number one, is that the natural environment that we live in is responsible for taking up a large part of what we put there. So we've really benefited from that. And they're part of these natural-based climate solutions that are being talked about, or mitigation strategies, that are strategies for reducing carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. But we have to understand that, like everything else in the Earth system, these ecosystems that are storing carbon, actively taking up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, are also responsive to climate change. And as we continue to emit carbon dioxide and contribute to this changing climate, these systems are changing as well. And we need to better understand where they're headed as well in all of this to get a better handle on what we're having to adapt to. So the response that these ecosystems would have are going to be regionally specific. We live in a very wet place where we probably would expect primary production in our forests to be able to increase because they have the available water to do so with a warming climate. But the form and the intensity of that water will have consequences on the stores of carbon that may be being put into those soils. The water that comes into these ecosystems actually connects pathways associated with carbon movement. It can help enhance natural sinks for carbon dioxide through productivity, but it also can have downstream consequences that we need to understand that could affect the fate of that carbon, but also ecosystem effects that are important to resources in that area. So I touched upon some things that my research group is involved in, and I have to acknowledge that this has been supported by a tremendous group of people that I've had the pleasure to work with, as well as others now currently, but lots of folks that span individuals that are in this province, as well as the Canadian Forest Service and folks from away that have worked on this research.